The late afternoon sun spread a coppery glow across the wide expanse of the American frontier, gilding the peaks of the distant mountains and throwing long shadows over the pine forest that hugged the valley floor. Wind carried the sharp scent of resin and the faint whisper of rushing water from the creek that curved near the clearing. It was a beautiful place, but it was unforgiving. The winters were merciless. Wolves prowled the timberline, and every log dragged, every stone lifted, was a reminder that survival out here had to be carved by one's own blistered hands. In that raw clearing stood Anna Mitchell, her skirts pinned high around her boots, her sleeves rolled back to the elbow. The sweat on her brow mingled with sawdust and the dirt that streaked her cheeks. She strained to balance one end of a heavy pine log against a crude sawhorse, her breath ragged, her arms trembling from the effort. Alone, she wrestled with the log until it thudded into place, sending a dull vibration through the half-finished skeleton of her cabin. Anna's husband had been dead nearly a year. He had left her with little more than debts, a cracked wagon, and a patch of land too wild for farming. When he perished in a mining accident, the neighbors had whispered their condolences and offered help, offers Anna turned down with a stiff spine and quiet resolve. She had no children, no kin nearby. She told herself that if she accepted pity, she would never again find her footing. Independence, she believed, was the only way she could honor the life she had lost and salvage her own dignity. So she built. Each day she rose before dawn, fetched water from the creek, chopped kindling, then turned her focus to the cabin. Her hands bore calluses like a man's, her nails chipped and ragged. Nights she collapsed onto a blanket inside the half-built walls, listening to coyotes cry against the moonlight. The work was brutal, but the rhythm of it steadied her grief. She told herself that once the roof was raised, once the door was set, she would feel whole again. Unbeknownst to her, she was not always alone in that clearing. From the ridge that sloped above the valley, Luke Carson often paused in his travels to watch. A cowboy by trade, he had spent the last decade drifting from one cattle outfit to another, his saddle and his horse the only constants in a life hollowed out by loss. Years earlier, fever had carried away both his wife and his small son in the span of a single week. Luke had buried them on a hillside in Kansas and ridden away before the soil on their graves had cooled. Since then, he had avoided staying too long anywhere. To attach himself was to risk breaking again. And yet, something about the lone woman down in the valley caught his attention. The first time he had seen her, she was hacking stubborn branches with a hatchet, her movements fierce with determination, though her body seemed on the brink of collapse. The second time, she was dragging stones to shape a hearth, her lips pressed tight, her eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. Each time, Luke had told himself he'd move on, that her struggle was none of his business. And still, he found his eyes drawn back. What stirred in him was more than pity. He recognized the loneliness in her stance, the weight she bore in silence. He knew it because he carried the same. Watching her fight to create a home sparked something deep inside, a hunger he had long tried to bury. He missed the sound of a voice waiting at dusk, the comfort of a shared fire, the small rituals of family. Seeing Anna wrestle with logs one by one stirred a thought he had not let himself feel in years, the yearning to belong again. But Luke also knew the danger of stepping in. A woman proud enough to hammer her own rafters would bristle at an offered hand. He had no wish to be mistaken for a scavenger circling weakness. So he kept his distance, his presence a silent shadow. Anna, for her part, sometimes felt the sensation of eyes on her, though she never caught sight of him. She dismissed it as nerves. Out here, the forest watched, the animals watched, even the sky seemed to watch. Still, when the wind shifted and she thought she glimpsed movement on the ridge, her heart would jolt, half in fear, half in hope that she was not entirely unseen. The days bled into weeks. Anna's cabin grew, walls climbing log by log, windows cut into frames, the roof timbers waiting to be set. Yet the more progress she made, the heavier the solitude pressed on her shoulders. Each swing of the axe, each shove of the lever, each drop of sweat into the dust reminded her of the husband who was gone, of the children she had never borne, of the emptiness that echoed inside even as the walls rose around her. Then one afternoon, Her strength betrayed her. As she heaved at a thick pine log, her foot slipped on loose gravel. The weight of the log wrenched from her grasp and crashed to the ground with a thunder that startled birds from the trees. Anna stumbled. Her palms scraped raw. Her breath knocked from her lungs. For a moment she sat in the dirt, head bowed, shoulders shaking, not with weakness but with the terrible awareness that she might not manage this after all. Up on the ridge, Luke's reins tightened in his grip. He leaned forward in his saddle, his jaw clenched, torn between staying hidden and riding down to help. The sight of her slumped against the half-built wall struck something deep in his chest. He longed to go, to offer strength, to tell her she wasn't alone, not anymore. But he also knew that rushing in too soon could drive her further into the fortress of her pride. Anna pushed herself upright, wiped her forehead with her sleeve, and set her jaw. Slowly, painfully, she wrestled the log upright again. She would not quit. Luke sat frozen, torn by the ache of his own longing. The sun dipped lower, painting the valley in hues of fire. Anna lifted her chin against the fading light, unaware of the cowboy's steady gaze from the ridge above. In that silence stretched between them, her determination, his longing, the first threads of conflict were drawn. The morning dawned with a thin mist rising off the creek, curling through the pines like pale smoke. Anna stirred from her blanket inside the unfinished cabin, her muscles aching from yesterday's toil. She pressed a hand to the small of her back and exhaled sharply. There was no time to rest. Another log needed hauling, another wall needed setting. She brewed a weak tin of coffee over the fire, swallowing its bitterness like medicine, then set to work with the steady stubbornness that had carried her this far. But as the hours wore on, she could not shake the feeling of being watched. The rustle in the trees, the faint clop of a hoof on stone, her senses sharpened, every sound magnified. She tightened her grip on the axe, ready to defend herself if need be. Solitude was difficult enough. Danger she could not afford. By late morning, the sound was undeniable. Hoofbeats, measured and unhurried, approached from the ridge road. Anna froze, breath caught in her chest. Few travelers came this way. Fewer still stopped. She brushed dirt from her hands, squared her shoulders, and waited. Through the thinning mist, he appeared. A tall man on a chestnut horse, his silhouette broad against the backdrop of towering pines. He rode with the loose ease of someone long accustomed to the saddle, his hat brimmed shading eyes that studied the world with quiet caution. His shirt was worn but clean, his boots dusted from the trail. Anna's heart thudded once, hard. She felt the weight of her isolation more keenly than ever. Strangers were not to be trusted. Yet as he drew closer, his posture bore no menace, only a kind of solemn reserve. The horse halted a few yards from the clearing. The rider touched 2 fingers to his hat brim in a polite gesture. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "Morning, ma'am." Anna kept her axe within reach. "You're on private land." "I reckon I am," he admitted, his tone even, almost apologetic. "Didn't mean offense. Just passing through and saw the work you're doing." Her chin lifted. "I don't need help." A faint smile touched his mouth, not mocking but wry, as though he had expected that answer. "Didn't say you did." For a beat, silence stretched between them. The breeze carried the scent of pine and horse sweat, the sound of the creek murmuring nearby. The man sat tall in his saddle, not pressing closer, not withdrawing either. Anna, despite herself, felt the raw edge of curiosity. "What's your name?" she asked finally. "Luke Carson." He inclined his head. "I ride cattle for the Circleby spread, few miles west." Or did, until the herd went north for the season. Anna absorbed this, weighing it carefully. A drifting cowboy, likely harmless, possibly dangerous. She searched his face, noting the lines around his eyes, the weariness that clung to him like a shadow. This was not a young drifter looking for trouble. This was a man who had seen loss, though she could not yet guess how she knew it. "And you?" he asked gently. "Anna Mitchell." The name fell flat between them. She did not elaborate, though he seemed to already know enough. Her widow's dress gone plain from wear, her hands raw with labor, the stubborn half-cabin behind her. Luke's gaze swept over the structure. You've come a long way with it. I'll finish it too. Her tone was sharp, as if daring him to question her capability. He nodded once, gravely. I don't doubt it. The quiet respect in his voice unsettled her more than if he had offered help outright. She had braced for condescension, for pity. Instead, she found none. Luke dismounted slowly, giving her space. He led his horse to the shade of a pine, letting the reins hang loose. His movements were unhurried, deliberate, as though he wanted her to see he carried no threat. I won't trouble you long, he said, pulling a canteen from his saddle. Just need to water my horse. Anna gestured stiffly toward the creek. There. He tipped his hat in thanks, then walked his mount down to the water's edge. Anna watched from the clearing, her pulse gradually steadying. Something about the man's presence filled the empty space around her cabin in an unfamiliar way. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it wasn't menace either. When he returned, he paused near the boundary of her worksite. His eyes lifted to the ridgepole timbers lying ready on the ground. Those will be heavy to set alone. Anna bristled. I'll manage. Luke studied her for a moment, then inclined his head again. I expect you will. The exchange hung in the air, charged but restrained. He had offered nothing, demanded nothing, and yet his mere acknowledgment stirred something in Anna she could not name. She turned back to her work, gripping the axe as if to remind herself who she was. The thud of blade into it echoed through the clearing. Luke lingered, leaning lightly against the saddle, watching without intruding. Finally, Anna set the axe aside, sweat glistening on her brow. Why are you really here, Mr. Carson? His gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. Truth is, I've been riding this country a long while. Seen men chase gold, seen others break land for cattle. But I haven't often seen someone build something from the ground up alone. Reminded me of things I thought I'd lost. His voice faltered, just slightly, but enough. Anna felt the tremor of grief beneath his words, though he quickly masked it. She knew that sound. She had lived with it herself. For the first time, she softened, if only a fraction. Loss leaves its mark, she said quietly. He nodded. That it does. The moment stretched, fragile and unspoken. Two people, each scarred by absence, standing on the edge of something neither dared name. Luke adjusted his hat, straightening. I'll be on my way then. Didn't mean to intrude. Anna should have felt relief. Instead, as he swung into the saddle, a surprising pang struck her chest. She almost called after him, but pride sealed her lips. He touched his hat once more. Good luck with the cabin, Mrs. Mitchell. And then he turned his horse toward the ridge, his figure receding into the trees, until only the whisper of hooves remained. Anna stood in the clearing, staring at the place he had been. The silence returned, heavy and absolute, yet it no longer felt quite the same. Something had shifted, something she could not undo. She lifted the axe again, but her hands trembled faintly. For the first time, the weight of her solitude pressed not as a badge of honor, but as a question. Would she truly finish this alone? The days after Luke Carson's departure dragged heavy, like a wagon wheel caught in mud. Anna swung her axe, lifted timbers, hammered pegs until her arms shook, yet the work advanced slower than she dared admit. The cabin wall stood half-raised, open to the sky, a skeleton of a dream that mocked her stubbornness. One afternoon, as storm clouds massed on the horizon, she struggled to roll a log toward the notched corner. The earth was slick from morning rain, and her boots slipped. With a sharp cry, she fell to her knees, mud splattering her dress. The log refused to budge. For the first time in months, tears pricked at her eyes, not from the pain in her muscles, but from the weight of futility pressing against her ribs. That was when she heard it again, hoofbeats. Anna stiffened, hastily wiping her face with her sleeve. Through the curtain of drizzle, the chestnut horse appeared once more. Luke astride had pulled low against the rain. His figure was both familiar and unsettling, as though the forest itself had summoned him to witness her faltering moment. You again, she muttered, pushing to her feet. He reined in near the clearing, dismounting with practiced ease. Storm's coming fast, he said simply. You'll want a roof before it breaks. Her pride flared. I told you before, I don't need help. Luke's gaze flicked to the stubborn log, then to her trembling hands. He said nothing for a long beat, only wiped rain from his brow with the back of his glove. Finally, he spoke in a voice low and steady, carrying the weight of patience. "Sometimes needing help isn't weakness, Mrs. Mitchell. It's survival." The words struck her harder than the fall. She opened her mouth to retort, but the sky split with thunder, silencing her. Sheets of rain began to pelt the clearing, soaking them both within seconds. Anna stared at the half-built cabin, its roof beams lying idle on the ground, and something inside her cracked. Without another word, Luke strode toward the fallen log, bracing his shoulder against it. "On three," he said. "Push with me." Anna hesitated, pride warring with desperation. Then, almost against her will, she joined him. Together they heaved. Mud sucked at their boots, rain plastered hair to their faces, but the log shifted, inch by inch, until it thudded into its notch. For the first time, Anna exhaled in something like relief. She glanced at Luke, his chest rising and falling with effort, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He looked back, no triumph in his eyes, only quiet solidarity. The storm worsened, forcing them into the skeletal shelter of the cabin walls. Lightning flared, illuminating the raw wood, the rough earth floor, and two figures pressed close not by choice but by necessity. Luke broke the silence. "Lost my wife in the fever, 2 winters back. Left me with nothing but the ranch work. Thought if I kept busy, I'd forget the emptiness. But it follows you, don't it?" Anna stiffened. His confession was uninvited, yet it settled over her like a mirror she could not look away from. She swallowed hard, then whispered, "My husband gone since the cholera took him. Buried him near the river before I came here. This cabin was supposed to be proof that I could build something still." Their eyes met through the dim light, each recognizing in the other the same wound, loss, raw and unhealed. The thunder rolled again, but softer this time, like the sky itself easing. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving the clearing drenched and glistening. Luke was already outside, saddling his horse. For a moment, Anna felt a surprising pang of disappointment. She had half expected him to vanish silently, as before. Instead, he paused, hat in hand. "I'll be back tomorrow. You've got beams that'll take more than 2 arms, if you'll allow it." Her instinct screamed to refuse, to cling to pride, but the memory of the storm, of their shared effort, tugged at her more powerfully. She found herself nodding barely. "Tomorrow, then." And so it began. Day by day, Luke returned. At first, the work was silent, practical, lifting timbers, setting pegs, splitting shakes. Anna remained guarded, speaking only when necessity demanded. But gradually, the rhythm of their labor wove an unspoken companionship. One morning, as they hoisted the ridgepole into place, Luke's hand brushed hers briefly. The contact was fleeting, accidental, yet it lingered like fire in her chest. She pulled back sharply, unsettled by the warmth rising within her. "Careful," he said softly, misinterpreting her reaction. "Don't want you losing your grip." But she had already lost something, her certainty that she wanted solitude above all else. Evenings found them seated near the small fire, Luke sometimes whittling, Anna mending a torn sleeve. He never pressed her for conversation, but when she spoke, he listened as though each word carried weight. She told him of the river where she had buried her husband, of the nights she lay awake measuring silence. In return, he spoke of the child he and his wife had lost before birth, of the empty house that echoed louder than any storm. The conflict between them shifted from suspicion to an inner struggle neither could escape. Anna wrestled with her pride, her vow to remain unyielding. Luke fought the ache of wanting something more than the quiet trails he wandered. Their transformation came not in one sudden moment, but in the slow accumulation of shared burdens. The cabin walls rose higher, the roof took shape, and in the building of a home, something fragile began to build between them too. Yet, beneath it all, danger still lurked. Not from wolves or storms, but from the fear each carried, that opening one's heart again meant risking another unbearable loss. On the final evening before the roof was finished, Anna stood in the doorway, watching the sun set over the ridge. Luke lingered beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "You've built something strong here," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. "I couldn't have done it without you." The admission startled her as much as it softened him. For the first time, she saw his guarded expression ease, his eyes reflecting not pity, but respect, and something more, something dangerous and tender. The air between them thickened, charged with everything unspoken. Neither moved. Neither dared to bridge the final distance. Yet the possibility hung there, undeniable. For Anna, it was the truest conflict of all, to remain behind the walls she had built around her heart, or to risk letting another soul step inside. And as the last light faded, she realized her greatest transformation was already underway. The first snow arrived earlier than anyone in the valley expected. Overnight, the forest was wrapped in white, every pine branch sagging beneath its weight, the creek rimmed with ice. The storm did not roar like summer thunder. It crept in silence, steady and relentless, blanketing everything in a hushed stillness. Inside the nearly finished cabin, Anna sat by the hearth, feeding small sticks into the fire. The walls stood strong now, sealed against the draft, the roof tight enough that not a drop of snowmelt seeped through. She ran her hand along the smooth timber at her side, marveling that this place, once only a vision born of grief, now rose around her in solid form. Yet even more surprising than the walls was the man seated across the fire. Luke Carson, his coat steaming as it dried, leaned forward with the calm patience of someone who had finally found rest. He had stayed after the ridgepole was set, stayed through the long days of splitting shingles, stayed through the final hammering of the door. Each time Anna thought he would take his horse and disappear back into the drifting life of a cowboy, he remained. And somewhere in those days, the line between helper and companion blurred. Anna still struggled with the thought of dependence. Even as Luke carried water from the creek, or split heavy logs for the hearth, her instinct was to protest. But over time she began to understand. His presence did not diminish her. It did not erase her effort, her labor, her strength. Instead, it doubled them, turning every task into something shared. What had once been a burden became lighter in the warmth of two sets of hands. On that snowy morning, she finally said the words that had hovered unspoken for weeks. "I thought this cabin would prove I could stand on my own." Her eyes searched the fire, afraid to meet his. "But I see now, it isn't standing alone that makes a person strong. It's knowing when to let someone stand beside you." Luke's gaze was steady, softened by the flickering firelight. "Loss makes us build walls, Anna. I know, I built mine years ago. Rode from ranch to ranch thinking if I stayed moving, the pain couldn't catch me. But all I found was emptiness." His voice dropped, low and raw. "You don't have to live like that. Neither of us do." Silence stretched between them, but it was no longer heavy. It was filled with possibility. That evening, as wind howled outside and snow swept across the clearing, Anna and Luke worked together to hang the last shutter. With a final push, the wooden slab clicked into place, sealing the cabin tight. They stepped back, breath rising in frosty puffs, both staring at what they had built. It was more than shelter. It was more than survival. It was a home. Luke reached for his hat, holding it against his chest. "Your husband would be proud," he said gently. Anna's throat tightened. For months, she had lived with the weight of comparison, the fear that letting another man's presence into her life meant betraying the one she had lost. But in Luke's words, she heard no judgment, only respect. She realized then that moving forward did not erase the past. It honored it, by refusing to let grief turn her to stone. She turned toward him, her eyes wet but unflinching. "And your wife, she'd be glad you didn't spend the rest of your days alone." The vulnerability in her words opened a door neither had dared cross. Luke stepped closer cautiously, as though afraid a sudden move might shatter the fragile bridge they had built. Anna did not retreat. When his hand found hers, rough callus against rough callus, it felt not like surrender, but like partnership. The days that followed stitched them closer. They hauled water, gathered firewood, cooked simple meals of beans and bread. Sometimes they spoke of their losses, sometimes of small hopes, planting a garden come spring, mending the corral for livestock. Other times, they spoke of nothing at all, content in the quiet rhythm of shared existence. The transformation in Anna was subtle yet profound. Where once she swung her axe with defiance, now she worked with steady assurance, knowing she was no longer battling alone. And Luke, who had once lived as a ghost wandering from job to job, began to laugh again, short, surprised bursts that startled even him. The cabin stood finished before Christmas. Anna decorated the mantel with pine boughs, their scent filling the room. Luke crafted a simple wooden chair, smoothing the edges until it fit perfectly by the fire. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell thick outside, they shared a meal of venison stew and cornbread. There was no grand ceremony, no vows spoken aloud, but as they raised 10 cups of coffee and their eyes met across the flickering fire, an unspoken promise passed between them. They had both lost, but together they had found again. The moral of their story lay not in the strength of logs stacked high, nor in the defiance of standing alone. It lay in the courage to let another soul enter the fortress of grief, to trust that love, even after loss, was not betrayal but renewal. On the frontier, survival often depended on grit, on muscle, on the will to push through storms. But true survival, the kind that gave meaning to the struggle, depended on connection. Anna had set out to prove she needed no one. Luke had set out to forget he needed anyone. Together, they discovered that healing was never found in isolation, but in the quiet miracle of shared burdens and shared hope. As the fire burned low that night, Anna leaned against Luke's shoulder, the crackle of flames mingling with the hush of falling snow outside. She felt his hand rest over hers, steady and sure, anchoring her in a way the strongest cabin walls never could. For the first time since loss had hollowed her world, Anna no longer felt alone. And for Luke, who had wandered for so long, the search for belonging had finally ended. The cabin in the valley was more than a shelter. It was a testament that even in the harshest wilderness, hearts could find their way home.